capes. I end these remarks with an impossible female task in Schiller's sense and mine. I just described that when much earlier, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we used to say that one-time only tasks were male and the repeated tasks, something you can footnote as opposed to cooking and cleaning. Let me end with the invocation of such a task, persistent and repeated, as I conclude my walk as an honorary male. The conclusion of Jacques Derrida's voyou, not a thankless task, but a gendered task in this sense, the necessary repetition of difference, where gender is a position without identity, Schiller's injunction to feminize the aesthetic because it is feminine. The last best gift to me, a woman, this first PhD, bequeathed against the grain by my disgraced teacher, Paul Demands. Here is the double bind in Derrida. To be responsible would be to invent maxims of transaction for deciding between two just as rational and universal but contradictory exigencies of reason as well as enlightenment. Maxims here, those of you who will remember the way Kant defines maxim at the end of pure reason as not something that comes from pure reason, but something that is devised subjectively by the philosopher programmed not to be, because human, not to be able to access the ideas of perpetual peace, saying politicians should perhaps access the philosopher's maxims, and we need to know the architectonic of Kant's definition of maxim as a kind of subjective prop for the philosopher. To be responsible would be to invent maxims of transaction who just as rational and universal, but contradictory exigencies of reason as well as so as to save the honor of reason, how to translate. For example, the word reasonable, and how to pay one's respects to, how to greet beyond its Latinity, and in more than one language, the fragile difference between the rational and the reasonable. I was saying this at Vachaplata between hope and expectation, and my Bengali friends were quickly telling me, giving me various synonyms for hope, but that's not the point. Don't look for the synonyms. Don't look for that. We've been doing that for hundreds of years. See what the problem is rather than offer synonyms. That's how we were tested, to show that we knew English. So and how to pay one's respects to, how to greet beyond its Latinity and in more than one language, the fragile difference between the rational and the reasonable, end of quote. The task of the translator transforms with the task and announces other fragile differences, such as that between queer and singular, for example. We can all think of others. The other side of the violence in the Nietzschean imagining of the post-reproductive old woman as Baubo is the Cumean Sibyl, whose utterance, I want to die, because she grew old and wise without death, because, when young and foolish, she had asked only for immortality, appropriately quoted in the original Greek as reported by wise men, was the epigraph to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. My generation of post-colonialists graduated into globality attempts to instrumentalize the Cumean Sibyl on the way to subalternity. This is the connection between the honorary males, of which Marshaka is certainly one, between the honorary male and our self-instrumentalization for subalternity. My generation of post-colonialists graduated into globality attempts to instrumentalize the Cumean Sibyl on the way to subalternity, but there too, reasonable and rational hang out as a difference. I hope some of you do and will walk with us there.
Thanks for your paper. Could you just say a bit more about the task and translation, what you were coming to at the end, when you were referring to Derrida?
I was referring to Derrida, but in fact I've been, I'm so influenced by him that quite often this really happens. I kind of say something in a very crude and vulgar way, and then I find, and I can assure you he wasn't reading me, so this is absolutely not because he has read me, but a little bit later, he says it in a much more subtle and sophisticated way. So in a sense, it's not really from Derrida that I'm getting a sense of this, except in that subtlety, reasonable and rational. What it is this is the supplementation of globalization, if you like. Globalization requires uniformization, not just good, not just terrible globalization, which is all that we have an example of, which is capitalist globalization, but even if there were good globalization. Now here I would say that those of you who favor alter globalization, I talked about this at radical philosophy, because I don't think there are too many people from the radical philosophy thing here, is there? Those of you who favor alter globalization would, for me, not be serious in terms of altering globalization, because alter globalization is interested in integrating globalization rather than systemic change. Systemic change is much harder, as we saw. 3 failed experiments to our credit, and our own situation in Western world is going to help. So the thing that I say there is that whatever good globalization might be, one might call it international socialism, now a pipe dream, it requires uniformization, not just sort of nation by nation, state by state, good forms of governance coming in after pipe dream. On the other hand, uniformization can only happen in terms of a few solid languages that can be shared. So therefore, since this is supposedly for people, what we have to do is to confront the double bind between that and the instrumental quality of that uniformization. And therefore, some folks have to accept the fact that deep language learning, although in the service of globalization becoming effective for a world of people, is not in fact the kind of swish fashionable globalization studies type thing. It isn't too bad, it's a supplement. So from that point of view, what I was trying to say is that deep language learning, which can affect the lingual memory or the infrastructure of the language, etc., where you can actually tell the difference between words that the outsider cannot tell the difference between. That kind of thing is in fact a supplementation of the vanguard of the global. So that's the task of translating, so that the difference that exists in English between rational and reasonable, it's a fine distinction. It's a very fine distinction. It is not accessible to many who speak English as a native language. Those of us who are wordsmiths will find it very difficult to actually, in an impromptu way, make a little paragraph about that difference. I will not be able to do it. I'll have to think about it. What I'm saying is that those kinds of differences exist in any language that can be a first language. And I'll explain this and then I'll shut up. Why a first language? Why first language? Because the first language, and I was saying that to your group the other day, the first language is learned by setting active the metapsychological circuits of the infant and creating an ethical semiosis out of the sort of parent situation and this situation of the parents understanding the language invented by the infant, and then that transaction leading the infant into a named language and so on. No other language is not like this. And so therefore, in fact, the idea is, remember I'm a comparative literature person, the idea is to move to a simulacrum of this kind of access to the infrastructure of a language that is called deep language learning. And that, again, I've said it to this group many times because I keep coming back and I like that quote. The description in the 18 Brumaire of revolutionary behavior, where Marx says that you learn a foreign language so well that when you produce in it, you forget the language that is rooted in you. That's the goal, right? That's deep language learning. I'm not using it metaphorically. So, in order to make solutions for other people, unless you understand this